welcome to the 18 March 2025 edition of the Naval Order of the United States Maritime History Virtual Lecture Series. Since May of 2020, when Continental Commandery recorded the first program in this series, we've recorded more than 70 presentations, and you can find all of our presentations at the Naval Order of the United States YouTube channel. And in a second, we'll show you a QR code that you can use to access that page. There we go. Okay. Before introducing this evening's speaker, I'd like to say a few words about the Naval Order. It's our nation's oldest ancestral organization dedicated to maritime history. Our mission is to preserve, promote, and celebrate U.S. maritime history and to provide camaraderie amongst our companions. Anyone who's interested in joining, if you've served in any of our maritime services, I invite you to visit the Naval Order website, new QR code coming up, and select how to join NOAS. Today's presentation is being recorded on YouTube and will be available for showing immediately after the program has ended. Use the same link as you're using now to watch the presentation. During the program, you'll be able to post questions and comments to the comments box. So I invite you to do that as Dr. Neimeyer gives his presentation. After he's completed his presentation, we'll have a question and answer period. And at that time, I'll share your questions with him. Dr. Charles P. Neimeyer is an adjunct professor of strategy and warfare at the United States Naval War College. He retired as a lieutenant colonel from the United States Marine Corps in 1996, having served in all three active Marine Corps divisions, including tours on the military staff of Presidents George Herbert Walker Bush and William J. Clinton. He's also was the Dean of Academics at the Naval War College, where he served for 2.5 years. With that, I want to welcome Charlie. Good to have you this evening.
Thank you,
and
sir.
This is a pretty exciting year, being around for the 250th anniversary of both the Navy and the Marine Corps, and that'll roll into our 251st anniversary. Will be some countries' 250th anniversary celebration as well. So as a Marine, it's pretty easy to understand how you became interested in Marine history. How did you choose your branch of services in which to serve?
Well, that's a great question. I was at the University of Maryland one day. I was jogging across campus. There was a gunnery sergeant in front of the student union with a table and some literature, and he asked me if I had a summer job. And I kind of jogged over and I said, well, no. I said, what do you have in mind? He says, well, you go through this little thing called platoon leaders class in the summer, and after you graduate, you get a commission. I said, well, what's it pay? And he goes, well, you get sergeant's pay. I went, hey, that's pretty good pay, huh? And so he goes, yeah. He says, give it a try. So I signed up without telling my mother, came home that weekend and said, guess what? I joined the Marines, and she had a heart attack almost. I think she threw something at me too. But I joined and went down to Quantico after that.
I guess I hadn't realized the Marine Corps had a program pretty much equivalent to the Navy's Reserve Officer Kennedy program.
Correct. And you'd go through 2 sessions, 6-week sessions at Quantico. And then once you got through those 2 6-week sessions, or you could do one combined session. I did them in 2 sections, but you could do one combined. You get offered a commission when you graduate, which is usually the following year. And when you do, then you go to the basic school and you're a lieutenant. Excellent.
No, with the Navy, of course, you did your second half of OCS after you graduated, so your date of rank would not be on par with the trade school graduates and the Navy ROTC graduates.
Correct. Got it.
I want to give you as much time as possible, so I'm going to give you the deck of the time and the con, move off screen, and let you take it away.
Okay, well, we're going to be doing the American Revolution, the early war at sea. That's the topic we're going to cover today. or tonight. And we're going to really kind of go through a whirlwind tour of the first year and a half of the early years of both the Continental Navy and Continental Marines. These are continental forces. Remember, we're not a United States of America yet. We don't have the U.S. Constitution yet. So these forces are brand new. They're something that we're just trying out. So we're going to be doing this for the first time as a nation. And we're going to have a lot of problems, as we're going to see in the coming slides. Now, one of the first things that is going to go down as far as establishing this Navy was something called the Rhode Island debates. Rhode Island State Assembly had urged the Continental Congress delegates there to introduce legislation calling for the building at, and I underline this on purpose, it's not, the writer didn't underline it, continental expense, a fleet of sufficient force for the protection of those colonies and for employing them in such a manner in places that will effectively annoy our enemies. John Adams remarked the opposition was very loud and vehement. The opposition primarily coming from the southern colonies. They saw this as New England's way of getting the Southerners to pay for a Navy that would not be used in Southern waters. They thought that this is exactly why the Rhode Island delegates wanted a Continental Navy, so that it would be used to protect their colony from annoying raiders, as we're going to see. And that's going to be a key point that you want to remember, because there's a connection between the Southern kind of opposition that's going to later affect the first Commodore Essex Hopkins, as we're going to see. So this is one of the reasons why we do have a Continental Navy. This is actually the HMS Rose. This is the replica ship. It may look familiar. It was used as the HMS Surprise, and it's now berthed in San Diego, I believe, as a dockside attraction. But if you saw Master and Commander, that was the ship they used. But the Rose was the scourge of New England, but particularly Narragansett Bay. Sir James Wallace, the very aggressive commanding officer, laid Newport under siege from his little squadron of vessels, with the Rose being the centerpiece, firing cannonballs that hit the town repeatedly, demanding that his ship be resupplied or face the wrath of the Rose. And as a result of this experience, the Rhode Island delegates became very, very animated about getting a Continental Navy established to chase off raiders like the Rose. So the Southern opposition, except for Christopher Gadsden of South Carolina, he was in Charleston Mechanics. He was the one that was supporting the Navy, but he's about the only delegate from down there. Samuel Chase from Maryland, he's a signer of the Declaration, said it's the maddest idea in the world. Edward Rutledge and other signers in South Carolina says the most wild, visionary, mad project that ever been imagined. Rutledge further predicted a Navy would ruin the character and corrupt the morals of all our seamen, making them selfish, piratical, mercenary, and wholly bent on plunder. And I told Dave the other day that he did not fall off on that last point, but I'm just kidding. So they decided to create a Continental Navy, and this is the guy that's behind it, and he moves in Continental Congress to do this. This is John Adams. On 13 October 1775, the Congress does decide to create this long-awaited Continental Navy. They're rather naive about this idea. They're going to try to, kind of fancifully bring it to fruition. But Adams himself says, well, how long can it take to build some frigates? Maybe 4 months, 5 months at the most. That wouldn't even have found the cordage and the ordnance for these things that were envisioned. It's going to take you're going to take most of these frigates about 2 years to be built. They're not going to get 13 that they're going to want to get. They get close. The Envision Navy, as I said, they want to build 13 frigates. They're going to immediately arm 2 vessels, the Cabot and Andrea Doria, which are going to be used by Essex Hopkins. They're going to appoint Hopkins of Rhode Island. There's no coincidence there. It's its first overall commander. And they're going to commission 18 officers, establishing service pay, subsistence tables, authorized prize monies for the capture and sale of enemy warships and goods, by the way, and adopted a naval code of discipline written by John Adams himself, formed an administrative body called the Marine Committee to give force, guidance, and direction to the new Navy. Now, this is what I want to point out here. The Essex Hopkins is going to authorize prize money, and the Congress is going to authorize prize money for this squadron that's going to be formed up. As we're going to see, that's going to be a factor in why they end up in the Bahamas and not where they're supposed to go, which was the Chesapeake Bay. First guy to get a commission is John Barry, and I want to really quickly go back here. It says 18 officers were initially commissioned. John Barry is going to be the first one that gets the commission, so he's got the seniority of all the other guys. John Paul Jones, very famous naval commander of the American Revolution, is ranked well down that list. He is a recent immigrant to the United States. He had come to America under dubious circumstances. His name was Paul Jones. He changes it to John Paul Jones, lives with his brother down in Fredericksburg, Virginia for a while, and eventually he ends up in other locations. But he's going to be the most renowned of the fighting commanders of the American Revolution, probably the most successful as well. Here's Essex Hopkins. This is a rather fanciful picture. Hopkins was once said to be an ordinary man who unfortunately was placed in extraordinary times. This shows him with a cutlass in his hand and looks like he's a man of war, but he really doesn't have a lot of wartime experience. He does have a lot of sea experience. He's been a captain of a merchant ship, and he's been all over the world, and he is very familiar with the sea. Unfortunately, he's not a very good commander of warships, but as we're going to find out. But nevertheless, Essex Hopkins, is going to try to do the best he can with what he has, as we're going to see. Here's some of the Continental Navy uniforms. I won't linger on those things. They rarely got to look this good, but they tried to do the best they could. The Marine Committee is going to be led by Stephen Hopkins. There's another familiar name because he's the brother of Essex Hopkins, and he's the chairman, of this committee. Other notables: Josiah Bartlett, William Ellery, Christopher Gadsden, that guy that was, the mechanic from Charleston, South Carolina, Joseph Hughes, John Langdon, Francis Lewis, and William Whipple, among others. All highly regarded congressional members, but not what we considered top tier, like members of the committee that oversaw the Army. John Adams thinks the appointment of the 70-year-old Hopkins is a great appointment. Stephen Hopkins takes him out to taverns in Philadelphia, treats him to drinks, and Adams just thinks he's wonderful. But we see there's problems with this Maritime Committee almost from the start. John Jay writes a letter to George Washington in 1779 and entitled it "Light at the Head." He says, while the maritime affairs of the continent continue under the direction of the committee, the Marine Committee consists of a delegate from each state. It fluctuates, new members coming and going, and 3 or 4 remain in it from the beginning, but very few of the members understand even the state of our naval affairs or the time or inclination to attend to them. So that's not a good sign for our new Navy, unfortunately. So rather than wait for this new Navy to get established, George Washington takes the initiative and builds his own mini Navy, and it's called George Washington's Secret Navy. And basically, there was a great book written by a guy named, I think his name was John Paul Nelson, and George Washington privately and covertly creates his own mini Navy around Massachusetts Bay in Maine. Yeah, James L. Nelson. I apologize here. James L. Nelson. Small armed former fishing vessels, sloops, and schooners, outfitted with light cannon, mainly focused on merchant shipping coming out of Canada, coming from England and coming to Canada or to other colonies, manned by experienced New England mariners. They capture 38 British vessels. They provide crucial supplies to the Continental Army, significantly accelerating the British evacuation of Boston, in March of 1776. That's an important thing to remember. So this secret Navy purposely avoids the scrutiny of Congress. Washington employs John Glover and his Marblehead, Massachusetts regiment to outfit and man the 78-ton schooner Hannah. This will not be the first time or last time that John Glover and his Marblehead, Massachusetts regiment are going to bail George Washington out. Washington later adds on the Franklin, Hancock, Lee, and Warren. These are all heroes of the early American Revolution. This small squadron is only moderately successful in interdicting British supply runs from Canada to its beleaguered forces penned up inside Boston. So it's okay. It doesn't do a great job, but it doesn't do a bad job either. It does a fair job. And in order to distinguish each other in this little secret Navy, Washington and John Manley, one of the captains of one of the ships, agrees to fly this flag. It's one of the very first flags flown from an American warship. It's called the Appeal to Heaven flag, a pine tree on a white background. John Manley is going to fly this from his ship, but all the other ships are going to get a copy of this flag. When they first put to sea, Washington's Secret Navy puts to sea, the other captains sent messages to each other saying, we don't have one of these flags yet. So they had the old British colors, the Union Jack, and they couldn't use that, obviously. So they had to resort to a kind of homemade variety. So the bunch of these things were made homemade varieties that were flown from George Washington's Secret Navy. But that's the very first flag being flown from Navy warships, Continental Navy warships in the war. So early Navy and Continental Marine Corps missions, we're going to talk about the Continental Marines a little bit later. Their job is to interdict that British shipping between the West Indies to the south and Halifax and Quebec to the north. Commerce raiding in British-owned waters would be mainly given to privateers, letters of marque, who would go over there and disrupt British commercial operations when they could. And the Marines that were going to be on board these ships were providing shipboard security and landing party reinforcement as needed. manning the fighting tops during ship-to-ship engagements, as we're going to see. So we have a shipbuilding program as well. So while we're trying to put together this ersatz Continental Navy, we're going to kind of take merchant ships and kind of turn them into men of war. Congress is going to authorize the building of 3 74-gun ships of the line, 5 32-gun frigates, and they're going to add 5 more 28-gun frigates and then 3 24-gun frigates. Only a single 74, the America, is going to get built during the war, and it's given immediately to France. It doesn't get completed till the end of 1782. We don't need it anymore since we're well on the way to getting peace established, and the colonies didn't have the sailors to man it anyway. The British Navy, by comparison, had 39 ships of the line, 9 50-gun ships, and 62 frigates. So you can see the minutia, the kind of the Lilliputian effort that we have here compared to the Royal Navy. Not much in way of competition. But we do have one secret weapon that the British didn't count on, and that's state navies. And probably more has to be done on these state navies. I'm really fascinated by Pennsylvania's in particular. But many of these newly declared independent states are going to create their own navies and design them largely for local defense and the prevention of smuggling. One of the most active state navies was out of Pennsylvania, and they do a fantastic job of defending the Delaware River. Even after Philadelphia falls to Howe's army in 1777, the river still stays in possession of the Pennsylvania State Navy and some Continental Navy ships as well. Again, they're mainly assigned to defend Delaware Bay, moderately successful. They're a combination of sailing vessels and row galleys. They work best on rivers because row galleys don't need wind. You can outmaneuver a sailing ship on interior waters much better than sailing ships could do that. So at the same time in 1775, we can't forget the Marines. 2 battalions are authorized on 10 November 1775. And I'm not going to read it all, but one of the things it says they take particular care that no persons be appointed to offices or enlisted into said battalions, but such as are good seamen or acquainted with maritime affairs, so as to be able to serve for or during the present war of Great Britain and the colonies. So this is what they're looking for. They're looking for Marines, but they don't just want any landlubber. They want somebody that's familiar with the sea and can potentially help out and understand, how maritime affairs are. So that's one of the things they put in the first law, raising these battalions. They're going to try to raise 2 battalions. They're going to get about 5 companies. They're going to get a battalion and a quarter. The birthplace of the Marine Corps is famously called Tun Tavern. We're not really sure exactly where it is. We think it's under one of the bridges that crosses the Delaware River. I think Captain Passman was saying it was probably under the Franklin Bridge. But there is an effort to recreate Tun Tavern. It's just a regular tavern. They would have drummers come by, beat the drums, and an officer would be there to recruit people or a sergeant. And they would try to get people attracted to the noise and then get them to join the Continental Marines. It was not easy to do because George Washington was at the same time recruiting for the Continental Army. He wasn't thrilled about the idea of having competition. He never did like a Continental Marine Corps in the first place. So again, there is the 10 November moment. These are some of the uniforms they wore. These are rather ideal uniforms. So oftentimes the soldiers would not necessarily have it, but there would be a green coat with white facings. Later on in 1779, they changed the green coat to red facings, and then volunteers would be given a red coat, as we're going to talk about John Paul Jones in a bit. It was not a popular uniform, as you might imagine. Nobody wanted to be a red coat. There's a uniform reality. After a Marine had been to sea for a while, his uniform would get pretty beat up. Some of the early roles and missions are very similar to the Royal Marines. They're not called Royal Marines till 1802. They're British Marines at this point, but they're going to serve as shipboard security, do that sort of thing. They have green coats, white facing, 69 caliber musket with a 22-inch triangular socket bayonet, a nasty weapon if there ever was one. A lot of the influence is coming from Philadelphia. A lot of the Marines that are raised are going to come from Philadelphia. They're going to get 5 companies. Captain, later Major Samuel Nicholas of Pennsylvania, who was a former Quaker, who was kicked out of the meeting because he went into the Continental Marines. He's considered the first Marine commandant. But in reality, he isn't. He's kind of like the senior Marine. He's the paymaster for the Marines in the Philadelphia area, but he's the senior man in charge, and so therefore he's referred to as the first commandant, although they don't call the Marines commandant of Marines until his predecessor comes in, or successor comes in, rather. Fighting tops. Here's a fanciful picture of Marines in the fighting tops. They're on one of the sailing ships, and they're throwing grenades down. That one guy's getting ready to throw a grenade. They're firing muskets. This is going to become a big deal with John Paul Jones, as I'm going to talk about later. But fighting tops are very effective at sweeping the enemy's decks, especially if you get in close. They weren't much valued if you're going to do a long-range gunfight. But if you got close to the other side, they could wreak havoc on the enemy's weather deck. So this is Samuel Nicholas, a picture of him. This is in the Pentagon. This is a picture they use for a Hall of the Commandants there, 7th Wing, 4th floor. Again, antecedents. This is the Royal Marine Shaco cap shield, and it says Gibraltar at the top. It was given to the Royal Marines, the royal title in 1802 for their performance at Gibraltar. So one of the first missions that this new Continental Squadron that formed up under Essex Hopkins is going to be given is the raid on New Providence. And you're going to see that that wasn't the initial target location for Essex Hopkins' squadron. And you're going to see why he might have gone there rather than the Chesapeake in a minute. But this is going to be considered to be the first amphibious landing on foreign soil, the first attack on foreign soil. And it's going to be fairly successful. They're not going to get everything they were after, but they pull it off without a hitch, as we'll see. But it's important to remember, New Providence is not the initial target of Essex Hopkins' squadron that's forming up. And this squadron is going to be formed up near Philadelphia in Delaware Bay area, and they're going to come out of there in February of 1776. And they're right when the ice breaks up, they're going to come out and they're going to come south. Okay, so this squadron again, the first ship is going to be former Black Prince, is renamed, reconfigured. Most of these ships are ersatz merchantmen, now reconfigured as men of war. It's going to be named the Alfred in 1775. It's soon going to be joined by Columbus, Providence, Cabot, and Andrea Doria. It's actually Andrew Doria. I had AI keep auto-correcting on me, but it's the Andrew Doria. Andrea Doria was another ship from the 20th century, and they formed into a squadron under Essex Hopkins. Again, Hopkins is not initially seen as the naval counterpart to George Washington. As you're going to see, he is not. The first vessel to fly the Grand Union flag is going to be hoisted by First Lieutenant John Paul Jones. He's the first lieutenant aboard the Providence, and he's going to be on the raid to New Providence, Nassau. The squadron is going to try to capture gunpowder from Fort Montague and New Providence, and it's the first use of Continental Marines in an amphibious assault. Hopkins gets underway, as I said, from Delaware Bay. His job was initially told he was going to relieve the region of the depredations of Lord Dunmore. He's the deposed royal governor of Virginia, who's prowling up and down the bay, Chesapeake Bay, in a British man of war and some naval ships that he has commandeered, some fishing boats, raiding plantation and liberating slaves with the intent of using liberated male slaves as colonial marines and attack the vulnerable Chesapeake River plantations. So when they proposed this Continental Navy to be formed at continental expense, the southern colonies, I believe, gave their consent with the idea that the squadron that's going to be formed is going to be used in their area. But as we're going to see, it doesn't happen. They feel they've been played, and they're not going to be happy about it. Okay, so what's the original purpose of the squadron? Was this guy. This is Lord Dunmore. He's the deposed royal governor. He's at sea. He's HMS Mallory is one of the ships he has down there, and a few others. He's going to hang around there for about a year. Unfortunately for him, the poor slaves that he liberates, they're not inoculated against smallpox, and in close quarters of ships, they get smallpox, and it just runs rampant through their ranks. Most of those poor people die of smallpox. Once that happens, Dunmore eventually gives up and goes back to England. But the original orders, Hopkins is told to ready the squadron to operate in the Chesapeake, but he's given a little leeway. But if he believed his force is too inferior, he's authorized to take it elsewhere, i.e. the Bahamas. But he's never explicitly told this. Congress also suggested operations in North and South Carolina. He experienced his initial weather delays in Delaware Bay, makes slow progress towards the Chesapeake. He really does not want to go there. Why do you think? Well, if you're going to get prize money, it's not going to be gotten in the Chesapeake. You're going to get it in the Bahamas, where a lot of ships might be laying there, or a lot of things you can take from those forts that you're going to take, you think, without too much opposition. There's a lot to be gained if you're a squadron intent on getting prize money rather than just running off Dunmore and his fishing fleet. So that's, I think, why he decides to go to Nassau. So the squadron order of battle, the Alfred is from Philadelphia, 30 guns. Captain Dudley Saltonstall, Columbus, Philadelphia, 24 guns. Captain Abraham Whipple, Andrew Doria, Philadelphia, 14 guns. Captain Nicholas Biddle. It's the first American warship, by the way, to receive a salute from a foreign power. Cabot, 14 guns. John B. Hopkins, that's the son of Essex Hopkins, by the way. Providence, 12 guns. Captain John Hazard. Hornet from Maryland. Providence is a Rhode Island ship. Hornet from Maryland, 10 guns. Captain William Stone. Wasp, 8 guns. William Halleck. And Fly, 8 guns. Hoisted Hacker, lieutenant. This is the frigate Alfred in Philadelphia docks. He's flying the Grand Union flag, as we're going to see in a minute. When Hopkins goes south towards Chesapeake, he's flying this from his mainmast, which is the Don't Tread on Me Gadsden flag. This was designed by Christopher Gadsden, the lone Southern supporter of the Continental Navy, and Hopkins flies this flag. The sloop Providence is formerly the Katy, again, a merchant vessel turned into a warship. That's the one that sits down there at Alexandria docks today. The replica does. That's the one John Paul Jones is the first lieutenant on. You'll see the Grand Union flag flying back there. And John Paul Jones is alleged to have been the first time that was raised on any American warship was when he raised it on the sloop Providence. Here's another in the flotilla going south. This is the Continental sloop Wasp. This is the Maryland-built ship. 8 guns, I believe it was, I think, and it's flying the Grand Union flag. This is a sloop Fly that's also flying the Grand Union flag. Sloop Fly and Hornet are going to have a collision trying to clear Chesapeake Bay. Consequently, Fly is going to be delayed getting to the Bahamas and joining up with the flotilla. Unfortunately, Hornet's going to have to return to Maryland to get repaired. It was damaged so severely. So they have a collision at sea. Hopkins' message, when he gets to Nassau, Bahamas, he's waiting around for 2 ships to catch up, the Hornet and the Fly. This is a mistake, as we're going to see. But he writes, to the gentlemen, freemen, and inhabitants of the island of New Providence, the reason of my landing and armed force on the island is in order to take possession of the powder, gunpowder, and warlike stores belonging to the crown. If I'm not opposed in putting my design in execution, the persons and properties of the inhabitants shall be safe. Neither shall be suffered to be hurt in case they make no resistance. So unless they shoot at him, he's not going to shoot at them. He's not going to damage them. So some of these early Marine combat operations, Samuel Nicholas is going to get the Marine detachment with frigate Alfred, about 50 Marines, and they're going to take some Blue Jackets along with them, and they're going to take the forts Montague and Nassau against very light resistance. They're going to seize guns and military stores, but they find very little powder because Hopkins delayed, waiting for the Fly and the Hornet to catch up. Hornet never gets there, obviously, and he wastes a day or so. Meanwhile, the British know that they're in the region, and they start to hide a lot of the powder. Eventually, Nicholas is going to receive promotion for his activity, his favorable report that he got, and making this landing, and he gets the rank of major. He returns to Philadelphia, tries to raise 4 more companies. He doesn't get all 4 of those companies. What happens to Hopkins? We shall see. So the Marines are landing, jumping off the ship's boats. I saw pictures of Marines landing in 1930 naval landing exercises. They're using the same boats. So they don't figure that out until almost before World War II starts. Here's Fort Montague, one of the forts they took down in New Providence. It's still there. This is the exact fort that's there. See, I don't know if the cannons are the kind of cannons they had back then. It's not a very substantial work, as you can see. The other fort they took the following day, March the 4th, at Fort Nassau, is underneath a hotel in the Bahamas. You can go down to the basement of the hotel and still see remnants of the fort down there. But this is actually the only existing fort of the 2 that still remains in the region. So again, I told you about the Hornet and the Fly colliding, and again, the landing party. Due to the fatigue of the landing party, however, there's no rest for 2 previous days. Hopkins is going to delay the assault on Nassau the following day on March the 4th, but that fort's taken out of the fight. So they take a lot of military stores. They get some powder, about 24 casks of powder. They don't get the 250 casks that the British have hidden. Again, John Paul Jones flies this flag, the Grand Union flag, very colorful. Remember, we're not an independent nation yet, so they still have the British Union Jack in the field there. And there he is, John Paul Jones. I'm going to do a little sidebar on him in a minute here because he is so important to the American Revolution. Establishes this fighting Navy tradition, carries on to the present day. John Paul Jones, give me a fast ship because I mean to go into harm's way. He was serious about that. He was really, really one of the best commanding officers we had. And the fact that he was ranked so low on the original captain's list is amazing. And so I always wondered why he wasn't, why he didn't get moved up quicker. But eventually he's going to show his stuff by mid-war. The British, though, didn't have the same view that we have of John Paul Jones. This is their view. They saw him as a pirate. Paul Jones, the pirate, and it shows him blowing things up, shooting things, and stabbing things, and things of that nature. So that's kind of what they saw. But we saw him as an outstanding and aggressive captain. And we're going to take a little segue into. I'm very briefly going to talk about it because I don't have a lot of time, but talk about the Serapis versus the Bon Homme Richard very briefly. Alfred doesn't have a good end. John Paul Jones had briefly commanded the Alfred. He was given the task of raiding off of Nova Scotia. He attacked the town of Canso. The raid was successful. Captain John Paul Jones now gives up command to Elisha Hinman, 1777, and later famously gets Bon Homme Richard in 1778. Alfred and Raleigh go on to capture several British vessels en route to France in 1778. On the way back, hoping to add to their score, Alfred runs afoul of 2 British frigates off of Barbados and is taken by those ships. So that's the end of the Alfred. Jones in command later. This is my segue I was telling you I was going to talk about. He's going to command Bon Homme Richard. Now, one of the things that a lot of people don't know about the Serapis versus Bon Homme Richard is that Jones overloads this vessel with Marines. Now, these Marines are not American. They're not even French. They're actually French Marines, Walsh, the Regiment Walsh. They're of Irish descent. What the French king would do is he'd hire Irish Catholics and he'd bring them to France to work for him as a regiment in his army. And because they were Catholic, they were acceptable to the French. And the Irish had 2 regiments of soldiers in the French army at the time. When Jones is putting the Bon Homme Richard together, he puts 137 of these guys on board his vessel. His idea was he was going to use the ship as kind of an amphibious transport and raiding platform against England itself. That's why he loaded up with Marines. However, it's going to really prove fortuitous because he's going to take the Serapis in a nasty ship-to-ship engagement, thanks in large part to the large complement of Marines aboard who are in the fighting tops, and they literally drive every single person, including the captain of the Serapis, below the weather deck, which enables us to do some things later on, which is a sailor crawling out on a yardarm because the 2 ships have been crashed together and they're just bashing each other for 3 hours. And Jones doesn't know if he's going to win or not. In fact, he's going to lose the Bon Homme Richard. It's going to actually sink, which is hard to do in a wooden vessel. But as a result of the fact that there's nobody on the weather deck, because 137 Regiment Walsh Marines are firing down on the weather deck, a sailor takes a grenade and bounces it down an open hatch, and it happens to hit some powder magazine down below, and it blows up, forcing the captain of the Serapis, which was, by the way, the newest and one of the best frigates the British had at that time. He has to strike his colors. Fortunately for Jones, he does, because Jones is forced to abandon the Bon Homme Richard, which is in sinking condition, and transfer everybody over back to the Serapis so he can survive. And he takes it eventually into Holland and patches it up and gets it back to France. So this is a very interesting thing. The Marines actually played a major role in success of John Paul Jones against this ship-to-ship engagement because he overloaded his ship with those types of forces. Here they are fighting out. They did it 3-hour fight. Almost lashed together, nose to nose. It was a real tough fight. The New Providence raid aftermath. So they take these forts, they take some military stores. There are no American casualties, British for that matter. The British resistance is limited to the initial cannon blast from Fort Montague. They did it for honor's sake, as they said. They attempt to spike the cannon. In the old days, they used to be able to put a spike inside the touch hole and they'd break it off so that you couldn't use that cannon again. They weren't very effective. And doing that, so the Americans were able to get these cannons pretty much intact. They only get 24 casts of powder, but significant haul of small arms, provisions, naval stores, and other stuff. The captured heavy ordnance is going to help out with the defense of Fort Griswold on the mainland and in the colonies. It also improves the viability of surprise amphibious assaults. And again, the first time the American ensign, the Grand Union flag, is raised on foreign soil. So this is a significant moment for the Navy Marine Corps team during this time frame. But things aren't over for old poor Essex Hopkins. On his way back, loaded down with a lot of booty that he's taken from New Providence. He also captured a couple of British ships on his way back. He runs afoul. Well, he didn't think he did, but he ran afoul of a single British man of war, a 6 raider, HMS Glasgow, 20 guns. Now, remember, Alfred has 30 guns. The Columbus and others have nearly the equal number of. He has 7 or 8 ships that are in his squadron, and it should have been an easy victory, but it turns into a debacle. It's known as the Battle of Block Island, for Block Island, Rhode Island. It's in the Long Island Sound. Hopkins and his subordinate commanders largely get in each other's way, or they don't engage at all, like Captain Hazard did on the sloop Providence. He just stays off and doesn't even engage whatsoever. The HMS Glasgow heavily damages the American squadron, easily escapes to nearby Narragansett Bay, where they have other British ships that could provide support. He basically makes a clean getaway. Only one British sailor is killed in the engagement. About 6 or 7 sailors are going to be killed on the American side, and a few Marines as well. First Marine casualty is going to occur at the Battle of Block Island, as well as sailors killed in this battle for the Americans. What is the aftermath of Block Island? Well, John Hancock, President of Congress at the time, initially praises Hopkins for the squadron's performance because he took New Providence. But soon, criticism over the Glasgow affair is not long in forthcoming. Nicholas Biddle wrote of the action, a more imprudent, ill-conceived affair never happened. The Providence captain, Hazard, was charged with a variety of offenses by a subordinate officer, including neglect of duty during the engagement in Glasgow. Abraham Whipple is going to get court-martialed for cowardice. He's going to be acquitted of those charges, but he's in court for 6 or 8 months. Hazard was eventually going to be convicted by court-martial and forced to surrender his commission and is cashiered from the Navy. So that's how bad this Block Island aftermath was. And it's not going to go well for Essex Hopkins either. Things are going to get worse. Now Hopkins comes under scrutiny. Guess what? The Southern delegates, who believed they had been played when his squadron failed to come to the Chesapeake in the first place, they argued he had violated his written orders to sail to Virginia, traveling to Nassau instead. He also distributed the goods taken during the cruise, not in the southern states. He distributed the goods during the cruise taken in Connecticut and Rhode Island without consulting Congress. He just distributed the goods to the colony of Rhode Island and Connecticut and said, well, I'm giving them to somebody, and that's who I choose to give them to. He was censured for this action by Congress, and some of his ships then become trapped at Providence, Rhode Island in 1776 by the British occupation of Newport, December 1776. Thus, they failed to sail again. Most of them trapped at Providence till 1779 or later. In January of 1778, Hopkins is eventually dismissed from the United States Navy and cashiered for good. Was it his fault? Was it his promise? What did he do? Well, it really was a problem that Essex Hopkins was an ordinary man in extraordinary times. He was not necessarily a squadron commander. He was probably a good ship commander, but he didn't know how to communicate or operate with numbers of ships, even against a single enemy combatant. He fumbled the ball. So it didn't look really good for him at all, and they basically told him to go home, and he does. So that brings me up to about 8:40, and we're a little bit earlier than I thought I was going to do because I was hurrying up, but I'll leave us more time for questions. So I'll go ahead and I'll take questions right now.
Excellent presentation. We have a number of comments from Corey 77777. First comment he made was from annoyance to annihilation, the Navy's journey. LOL.
That's right. That's true. They're gone by 1780. They're about most of the ships. I don't think a single frigate that they built during the war met with a good end. I think all of them were gone by 1780. The Battle of Charleston finishes off what's left of the Continental Navy, and they're done for at that point.
It's amazing that we allowed ourselves to get bottlenecked up in Providence.
Yeah, that was, well, they kind of surprised them because the British showed up just suddenly in 1776 with 6 regiments, 3 Hessian and 3 British. They land on the main dock at Newport, and they march ashore against token resistance. Militia flees up island, goes across to Tiverton. They're going to eventually fight a battle there in 1778. The biggest battle in New England. It's going to be the Battle of Rhode Island, August of 1778. And it's going to be another American debacle.
Was that in Tiverton, or was that?
They came over from Tiverton, and they came into Portsmouth, and they fought the battle in Portsmouth. It's the area that they fought on was the Americans were trying to get off the island. They were in Newport, and the Americans came down island, mostly militia. The French were supposed to land about 5,000 regular forces. The French decided they don't want to land. They go to Boston instead because they got some storm damage to some of their ships. And so they leave the militia high and dry. But we had 20,000 militia against about 4,000 British and Hessian regulars. But that was more than enough to drive the militia off. One of the militiamen that was at the Battle of Rhode Island was none other than Lieutenant Colonel Paul Revere. who he flees with the rest of the militia and goes back to Boston.
Ready to fight another day.
Exactly.
We have a question about whether or not the Bonnie Richard was ever found or hauled.
I don't. That's a great question. I think somebody like Robert Ballard might have. I think because it was wood, and it was sunk, in the 18th century, it probably has disintegrated. If it had been one of the steel ships, like Robert Ballard found the Bismarck, he's found the Yorktown, he's found the Japanese carriers from Midway. I mean, this guy's an amazing explorer and just a great naval guy. But I don't know if they've ever found where the Bonhomme Richard is. Yeah, I know the modern day Bonhomme Richard unfortunately burned at the dock in San Diego just recently.
There you go.
Yeah, so not a good end to that one either.
Not so much. Did the French and American navies ever do a joint campaign, battle, or expedition?
Oh yeah. Well, Newport was the first one. That was supposed to be a joint campaign that kind of blew up. That was one of the problems we had with the French at the beginning of the war. Was that in the middle of the war, they came in overtly 1778 after Saratoga, and when they come to Washington, the guy's name was D'Estaing. Washington thinks, "Oh, great, the French are here. We can take New York." And the French go, "Nah, we're not really keen about going to New York and crossing the bar at Sandy Hook. So we're going to go somewhere else." So Washington, as a kind of as a compromise, says, "Well, don't go anywhere else. How about Newport? They got some forces there we can take out." So they planned this operation in Newport in 1778. And the French, D'Estaing does not coordinate with the American commanders on the ground. He leaves, decides to go on his own to Boston, leaves the Americans high and dry. Following year, Savannah, 1779, the very same thing happens again. D'Estaing's in charge. They foul up the attack at Savannah. French don't really work well with the Americans. That doesn't change until they get rid of D'Estaing and Rochambeau comes and they land Rochambeau's forces. The British voluntarily abandoned Newport in 1779, and then when Rochambeau comes right after that, Washington has his troops land there, and they occupy Newport. And so he's in New York, Rochambeau's in Newport, and then when they get an opportunity to come south to Yorktown, the French are going to use their navy at the Battle of the Capes. And of course, another combined operation that actually does well this time. So 2 out of 3, we don't do well. So Newport's a bust, Savannah's a bust, but Yorktown's great.
Yorktown's great. Wraps things up.
Exactly.
Dave, over to you.
Yeah. Hello, Charlie. Question. Hopkins kind of gets a bad rap in that he couldn't get his ships back out to sea once they pulled in that summer. And I think part of it was he had some recruiting issues because he's competing against not only these state navies, but
Privateers.
The privateers.
Yep. Yeah, one of the problems that the Continental Navy had, in fact, the United States Navy had up to the Civil War, was letters of marque and privateers were where you wanted to be if you were in a war. A lot more freedom of opportunity, a lot more possibility of making a lot of money. They call it a grand slam. If you were very lucky privateer, you could catch a fat merchantman. Everybody wins. Everybody gets a piece of the pie. If you bring that ship into a friendly port and condemn that ship, plus its cargo at a vice admiralty court, everybody gets a piece of the pie. And down to the lowest person on the ship, the captain, of course, gets a bigger share, and the officers, and then the ranks as well. But it's that's where you wanted to be. The last place you wanted to be would be on one of these state Navy road galleys, because you're not going to get any prizes. Your prize is going to be a 6-pound cannonball maybe shot at you. But so the middle ground is going to be the Continental Navy. There's possibility of prize money. One of the reasons I'm convinced that Hopkins goes to Nassau rather than the Chesapeake was he's going to get more prize money and more booty from the Bahamas than he ever would going to the Chesapeake. So those ships that Dunmore had were just pieces of junk. Even if he took them, they weren't going to get him much money. They were just old converted fishing vessels and sloops and things of that nature. But he knew that he takes these forts and he takes a lot of this material, he gets a piece of that. And so all that comes back, and he got a share when he takes it to Connecticut and Rhode Island, again, without authority, sells it to the continental authorities in Connecticut and Rhode Island. he got money for that. And of course, Congress says, wait a minute, you weren't authorized to do that. And he said, well, I did it. And so he got in trouble for that. But yeah, privateers were really where you wanted to be. And unfortunately, most privateers were not successful. There was the rare privateer that would be highly successful, but typically British prisons were, by the end of the war, were bulging with privateer sailors that had thrown in jail in jails of London. That's where they stayed for sometimes years at a time.
So I think your answer to Dave's question kind of speaks to Corey's question about whether or not our bureaucracy, I wouldn't call them elected officials at that point, but the representatives, were they really, was it a bureaucracy issue, or was it maybe our commanders had too much freedom?
Well, I think it was really a political misunderstanding that the Southerners, I think, were told, look, if you vote yes for a Continental Navy, we'll use it in your area. And then when he goes to Nassau and then goes back to New England and dumps the stuff off that he took from Nassau, the Southerners thought they got duped. They thought they got played. And as a result, they were the biggest, they were the angriest voices in Congress against Essex-Hopkins, where, hey, your orders were to come to the Chesapeake and you went to Nassau. And see, it's too late. He already gotten their vote for the Continental Navy. So I think the way they got them to vote was that the New Englanders probably said, don't worry, when we get it, they're not going to stay here. They're going to come down your way and they'll get rid of Dunmore and his guys and anybody else that's harassing. And so they go, great, we got our vote. So they said, great, Continental expense, but the votes are going to be used down here. And they don't do it. And so then he goes back to New England, where the Southerners suspected was the intent all along. But the red tape he's talking about is a great question. They did handcuff the commanders a little bit, but here's the problem: is that he was given very little leeway. I mean, it said go to the Chesapeake, and then it said, but if it looks like there's too much resistance there, you're authorized to go other places, maybe the Carolinas, or they never mentioned the Bahamas at all. But so he doesn't even check the Chesapeake. He doesn't even sail towards it. He just goes straight for the Bahamas because he didn't want to go there in the first place. And so he's just going to go where he wants to go. And so that was the problem. Was that it wasn't so much red tape handcuffing him. It was Hopkins thinking about, well, how do I make this work out for me personally? And
he didn't think his mask would have enough clearance underneath the Chesapeake Bay Bridge.
That's true. Not anymore. Well, yeah, it's like you can see where Dunmore was at. He fights a battle on land, a place called Great Bridge, and he loses that battle too. So he doesn't do real well. Yeah.
So here's another viewer comment.
Oh yeah, saying would he be viewed as a pirate, not as a privateer? Well, he actually had a Continental Navy commission, so it would have been hard to call him a pirate. They called him a pirate because of his background. He was in the Royal Navy. He was allegedly had gotten into. It was in an engagement. It was they were fighting, I believe, the French or something like that, and one of the sailors was attempting to run below deck, and Jones, I think, shot him or did something to him, but he killed one of his own sailors, and which made him kind of a scary guy. Didn't say he was necessarily bad or good, but Jones felt like, well, maybe it's time to go to the colonies. So he decides to leave after this incident. It was unclear whether they were going to bring charges against him for what he did, but he realized he was persona non grata in the Royal Navy from that point on. That's why he comes to over there. But Jones does have a Royal Navy commission, and so he would not be treated as not a Royal Navy. He has a Continental Navy commission, so he would not be treated as a pirate. Now, the privateers sometimes would sometimes not have their letter of mark, or they would claim they were privateers, and if they got taken, they could potentially be hanged as pirates. And some of them were facing the hangman's noose if they didn't have that letter of mark on board. The letter of mark is a letter, literally a letter given by the Congress authorizing your ship to operate as a man of war against enemy shipping and other commerce, and take those ships if they can. And it's legal pirates. The age of piracy, all these pirates that started off back in the 1690s, the 1720s and 30s, the golden age of pirates, most of those guys started off as privateers in letters of marque.
Okay. Let's come back to this question as a point of clarification. he was speaking about strictly, were there any joint American and French naval engagements
Okay, I
where
got
we had French ships and colonial ships fighting against the Brits?
I don't recall any. I don't recall. The French Navy operated as the French Navy. It doesn't really get engaged very often. D'Estaing is really a terrible commander. The French had a habit of taking generals from their army and putting them in charge of the Navy. They would literally be admirals at sea, but they would be actual generals that command land forces. They said, well, you command land forces, you can command ships at sea, right? Not knowing that you really need a little bit of more specialty than that. But no, there's no mixing of the Continental Navy ships. You might see like One Arm Richard, obviously, is a French vessel that was commissioned. Ben Franklin got it from the French. And
Right.
Ben Franklin had a stack of commissions that were blank. He was really interesting guy. He's in Paris. He's really not living a tough life. He's really enjoying the life in Paris. But he has this whole stack of commissions, and Jones comes to him. He gets the commission to be the captain of the Bon Homme Richard. And the idea is that he's actually going to make landing. He does make a landing operation at a place called Whitehaven when he was in charge of the Ranger, I think. And he does a little raid at a British seacoast town. Not much was taken, but he got their insurance rates to go up after that. So.
Doesn't this business of making generals, admirals, date back to the Peloponnesian Wars?
Yeah, in fact, it does. I think Alcibiades was an admiral at one time. So yeah, I do that as well. You're right.
Dave, back to you.
Charlie, question. Isn't there a second raid in the Bahamas? I think I recall that actually went pretty well.
Yeah, it did. There was a second raid, and I don't have the details right off the top of my head, but there was a second raid. They do go back in there. Bahamas really were not defended very well. British had most of their sea power either in New York or up by Canada or down in the Caribbean. That was where the value was. The Bahamas were near the Caribbean, obviously, but they really weren't a wealthy colony. They didn't have a lot there. They're pretty much, desert islands, and very nice today, obviously, to go there to vacation. But back then, they weren't making a lot of money for the British. I always tell my students when I talk about the American Revolution, the island of Barbados, which is this tiny island in the Caribbean, was worth more to the British Crown than all the American South put together. It's making more money with its sugar plantations and sugar production, molasses and rum, than any of what the southern colonies are producing at the time. And so, what's more valuable to the Crown for monetary value? It's the Caribbean sugar islands. That's what they prize, and that's what they cherish. That's the reason why George Rodney, 1782, goes down and fights the Battle of the Saints and defeats the same fleet that won the Battle of the Capes the year before and sealed our independence off of Yorktown.
So in terms of cash flow, the sailors would get a portion of prize money. Were the Marines embarked considered part of the crew, so they would get similar shares?
Everybody gets a piece, and it was a written gradated amount, and it would be whatever the ship was worth, whether the cargo was worth. They would condemn it all at the Vice Admiralty Court, and then everybody would get a gradated piece. There was a schedule they had published. The captain would get obviously the largest share, but the commanding officer of the Marine detachment would get a larger share than, say, the enlisted Marine that was on. But everybody down to the ship's boys, they would get a share.
So I think your previous answer to Dave's question sparked this question.
Oh yeah. The Spanish and French ever tried to capture Jamaica, where the sugar was used for. Yet they thought about it. That's one reason why the Grasse. Comte de Grasse goes down to the Caribbean after the Battle of the Capes. Is that he's going to cause problems for the British down there. Remember now, he has defeated the British fleet off the Battle of the Capes. They have to limp back to New York and patch things up. They think they're going to get back in time to rescue Cornwallis. Well, they don't get back in time, and Cornwallis has to surrender. Meanwhile, after Cornwallis surrenders, de Grasse then takes his fleet and moves into the Caribbean. French have Haiti, they have Martinique, and a few other islands down there, and as a result, they want to protect them as well. But that's exactly where George Rodney knows the French will go, because that's where he takes his fleet after he defeats the Spanish fleet off Cape St. Vincent. He comes, west and heads straight for the Caribbean, he says, I know he's there, and I'll take him down when I see him. And they take him out before he can cause much damage to British colonies like Barbados and Jamaica.
Steve Sinclair, anything from you?
No, other than I would point out that Hopkins went on to actually have a distinguished career after.
Oh, you just froze up.
After something, I don't know.
After, and then Steve, you just froze up on the screen. I was guilty of that earlier. My server problem seemed to have transferred you. If you can type your question into the chat.
Back now.
Are you back? Okay.
After what, Steve?
We lost you at the word after when you were asking your question.
Yeah, no. It was interesting that Hopkins, after he was dismissed from the Navy, went on and stayed a prominent member of in society afterwards. It did not.
It didn't hurt the rest of his career, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He kind of got like, I think Congress turned on him because the Southerners were upset, and I think that, I think New Englanders recognized it.
Dave, I think we have time for one more question before we head into our wrap up.
Just one observation is that this is the 400th anniversary of the French Navy this year. And, we have, the British, they celebrate Trafalgar Night, which is, beating the French. We celebrate Midway, that's, beating the Japanese. The French, apparently, they consider the Battle of the Capes as their, greatest triumph. So, they're going to be highlighting that this year during their 400th anniversary, which and they're going to extend those celebrations to the Bay Area. So just a note.
I guess it was about a year or two ago. They had a French ship, the Hermione, was in Annapolis. I went down and spoke when Hermione came in. Unfortunately, I think the Hermione has gone broke. They're trying to find some buyers to get it back on its feet.
It's a shame when our historic ships, when I say our, I'm thinking globally, don't have enough funds. There was a ship recently struck, I think it was in Hawaii. Somebody wrote an article to Naval History or Sea History. I can't remember which one, but he had spent 11 years working on her rigging, and they ran out of money. Do you recall which ship that was, Dave?
It's off the tip of my tongue.
Okay.
But, I'm familiar.
Not a problem. Let me again thank you, Charlie, for an excellent presentation. Fascinating stuff, which was, just you think about what we didn't have available to us during the period of the founding years of our Navy and Marine Corps, and the job they did with the limited resources they had is really awe-inspiring. I'm now going to just take a second to remind folks that we'll be back on 8 April when Mike Fink will discuss the Midway's World War II Air Group, and again on 15 April when Dr. Tommy Shepard will discuss his recently published book about the Navy's first SecNav. We hope to be piloting a new webinar platform in April, so stay tuned for that. Hopefully it won't cause too much disruption for our viewers, but keep your eyes on our Monday All Knowist bulletins, and we'll be providing URLs for that. And with that, I want to wish everybody a great evening or day wherever you happen to be in the world when you're watching this. And Charlie, thank you again.
Thank you.
Mark, take it away with our closing sequence.